Celia System, City of Artre, mid-2670, Castra. Missiles, tracers, and explosions littered the sky. It was unlike previously where it seemed like a storm of fire rained down from above, shooting projectiles of fire in all directions in addition to smoke, and whatever else. They had fallen from what looked like coffins of steel, and they littered the place. Apparently, there were some anti-air batteries in place, but they decided to follow the bright light that the pods expensed, missing most, if not all, the enemy, who decided to fall from the sky all those hours ago. Castra sat against a wall with his rifle slung across his chest. It was squared, and the magazine was fed in from behind the grip with a red wrap and a black central-colored shroud with a single white line down its center. His armor was tinted a dark gray, atop a black ancestral military garb worn by many veteran warriors of the Celian ground troops, and he was part of the best. The sun had yet to rise when he was ordered to move for a surprise attack against an enemy convoy. The group before him were of a similar group, sporting similar colors of their armor, but they differed by the color of their issued rifles. Ever since higher-up began the process to move to a different medium for firepower, the company that manufactured their weapons had started going out of business, so much of their current weapons were worn and falling apart, all while they had yet to receive the new series of weapons. "I'm telling you, this thing is going to blow in my face before we even see the new tech," argued a young, fresh warrior. "I mean, look at this! Can't even get replacement parts!" The soldier in question flashed his rifle. It was the commonly issued Type 22 repeater, their main attack rifle for close to medium range. "Yeah, I heard early on that the Choke Worlds got first pick, since they're dealing with the Union after all," replied another young Celian on the matter. "Still," replied the other, "we've got Terran rats walking about in our capital. How could the defenses of Celia not get first pick? We barely even have our tanks roaming the streets, since most of them were bombarded by enemy craft. I'm telling you, we make this kill, then we should go." He made a valid point, and Castra agreed to his logic. But he deemed it to be a logistic issue, rather than who got first pick. That, and it was possible that the Terrans had seized many of their cargo ships en route to them, but he didn't know for sure. All he had was a set of kill orders for an individual, and they were on lookout. From their scout reports, there was a mechanized detachment inbound that would run them straight into their kill zone. Unfortunately, he had yet to hear from his scouts, so he expected them to have met their end. He found it inevitable since they lacked his unique asset, so they were probably found and executed. The small group staged themselves within a small room in a building that overlooked an incoming road, with it splitting to their left and right. It was a building with 7 stories, and they placed themselves on the 5th. A series of fortifications were made to reinforce it from small arms fire and the occasional explosive. In a corner, a veiled blur lied motionless on the floor, peering out through an artificially made hole big enough for his rifle to fire from. After a moment, the veiled blur dissipated, revealing his true form in armor similar to Castra. A weapon was donned with a red grip and a blackened shroud with a single white stripe. They were the only 2 from a separate troop inserted to fight with the troop of another war chief. Castra had moved beside him and knelt, peering out through the window that met his eye level. "What do you think of this group, Tarek?" asked Castra. "The Gander's fist," replied Tarek as he eyed the soldiers in question. "They could be better, but not exactly who I want to die with." Castra nodded with a chuckle, followed by a sigh. "Commander Mariv had better make it worth our while." The pair had been attached to a portion of Chief Commander Orland's troop shortly after receiving their kill order of a specific individual from none other than Chief General Torlak himself. "For a war chief as fabled as Torlak, this is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one," said Castra. "So I've heard," voiced Tarek. "Apparently he turned down promotion so often that the council themselves had to intervene." "Yeah, but I also heard that the very enemy we're fighting had routed him numerous times, so I still wonder if he's all they made him out to be," added Castra. "He was the man who fended off the last of the Union, after all." "Then why be here? If they're that powerful, then we don't stand a chance. We're just waiting to die otherwise," said Tarek. Another valid point. If the man who apparently fought off the last of the Union forces from Celian space was sent packing by an unknown force, then why would they even try to fight? The Union was known as the epitome of a multifaceted amalgamation of alien hierarchy, thwarted by a single race. There were holes in that theory, however, and browsing of the forums would only send one into a hole so deep, no mining equipment could get them out. Who knows? But what I do know is that we have a home to defend. We can figure what to do after we recover, stated Castra, to which Tarek scoffed. Ha! Maybe if we had an edge. I don't know if you saw, but those surface-to-orbit cannons that covered this section of space were taken by 2 teams of Terran warriors. It was only a matter of time before the orbital station fell. Castra couldn't agree more. They had been briefed shortly after entering the city that the Council's special weapons were under attack, but they only had time to assist in the defense of the closest cannon to the north. But even there, his troop suffered severe losses from an unknown shooter, beyond his standard range of engagement. It was a jarring engagement, at first having the upper hand, but he grew concerned over the armored vehicles that assisted them. They did a number against their own, but his people practically encircled the cannon. It was too much for the enemy to handle, but the cannon was destroyed anyway, as if his involvement didn't even matter, which added to his displeasure. In the end, with the destruction of the cannon, the Terrans were able to evacuate with all of their people towards the south, where he saw the smoke of the second cannon that met the same fate. If we had the numbers, then we can certainly take them. I heard a report that the Vengeful Rain Troop is wrapping up a Terran group somewhere to the north. Sendri Park, I think, although they've been at it for several hours, so who knows, replied Castra. Tarek grew quiet as he searched his brain for a similar topic on the Terrans, eventually coming to a question that had formed in his mind. Have you seen a Terran up close? Or at all? He asked. Castra shook his head in the negative. Can't say that I have. I've seen the pictures, but it's always from afar. I'm thinking, if I land this kill, think we should sneak a peek? Added Tarek. Castra made an audible laugh, clearly berating the suggestion. Sure, if you can manage to get rid of the armored vehicles and get past everyone trying to protect them, you'd be lucky. Very lucky, said Castra. No need to be sarcastic, started Tarek. It's just that they look similar, almost uncanny-like. Sure, they're taller, but not by much. If anything, their size reminds me of Brallo. Fathers guide him. 2 arms, legs, eyes, even hair. If it wasn't for the skin, eyes, and ears, then we'd practically be the same. Now you're talking nonsense. Maybe all that time under your cloak had fried your brain, rebuked Castra. Uh-huh. Why don't you take a call? Maybe check with Mariv when we can get out of here, added Tarek, clearly eager to leave. Besides, I think I see something down the road. It looks like the target. Castra's focus had now sharpened, and the tension of the room rose with everyone's attention toward the street described by Tarek as he continued to peer through his scoped rifle. Castra felt the tinge of a buzz that ran through his body for a moment before settling. It was quick, and subsided just as fast, which easily made him disregard it as a battlefield sensation. When you have the target, you're free to fire, ordered Castra. I see him! Bastard's just looking at his wrist. I'm taking the shot, replied Tarek. Castra looked with a set of binoculars at the target, and as he said, there was the target fixation on his wrist. Just as quickly as Tarek notified him of the target, he hastily fired a round, and the haze of the bullet trailed to the unsuspecting individual, landing square on the left side of their chest. The force was enough to knock them backwards and onto their back, motionless. Got him! That was easy pay! Quick, let's get out of here, Tarek began, but before he could finish, a wave of gunfire assaulted their position, sending debris from the walls into them. Castra and the rest of the group went prone, as most of the shots hit high, but the whir of the bullets flying inches above their heads did well to keep them suppressed. Castra crawled to the entrance in a rush, still minding his height so as not to catch a bullet to his head, and called out to Tarek from behind what he deemed to be a better modicum of cover, since most of the rounds that entered through the walls of the building slowed enough to not penetrate further. I'm going to call Commander Mariv for some fighter support, Castra tried to call out, but the sounds of gunfire drowned out his words. But it wasn't just gunfire that stopped his words short of finishing, but a loud, thunderous boom that seemingly caused the rest of the gunfire to cease. Since the firing began, time had felt like it had sped up, but when he looked at the time fashioned on his wrist, he noticed several minutes had passed than what he had experienced. It was only after the latest explosion that normal time had returned, and with it, a deafening ringing sound deep within his ears. When he looked into the room, there was smoke that perforated the space and green liquid that layered the floor. The bodies of his soldiers were now nothing more than chunks of meat attached to thin pieces of clothing and armor. He searched the room for Tarek, before falling his eyes to the location he last saw him, and saw the blurred veil that rested in the same position as before. When he moved to the body, he saw it begin to move, before ultimately forcing themselves up. He was relatively unscathed, but his rifle was in shambles, and he was covered in his own men's blood. "Tarek! You live! How?" said Castra as his hearing slowly began recovering. "You'll hate me for this," he began, "but I ended up using one of Orland's men to take the blast instead of myself. Selfish, I know, but I didn't feel like dying just yet." Castra shook his head to his comrade's assessment, denying how he would have felt. "Much rather them than you. Since you live, we'd best be going. I doubt those whose commander you killed will stop before they find you." Tarek shook his head at the notion, urging Castra to turn his vision outside where the armored vehicles drove towards them. "I saw it just before we got it by that explosion, but I saw it. I didn't kill him. Their commander lives." Tarek's tone was serious, unlike previously. It was evident that he had a score to settle, and wanted the bounty, regardless if he would live to see it fulfilled. "And what? You wish to assassinate him here? They were just attacked, so I don't expect them to be caught off guard again. Face it, we failed. Let's leave, and perhaps you can get another chance," pleaded Castra, to which Tarek denied the retreat. "It's possible they think that this ended our attack, which it did, but we also have a second chance. You go, report to Chief Commander Mariv, so that they can bolster defenses of the council chambers," said Tarek. Castra wanted to argue, but as they did, the enemy advanced closer, causing him to concede to his comrade's demands. "Fine. May the fathers guide you. I shall see to the council's defense," he conceded. "Be well, Tarek." He gave a farewell to his friend and departed, knowing well that his friend was concealing a hidden pain. He couldn't tell at first, since the floor was layered with blood, and Tarek still utilized his cloak, which concealed much of the damage he actually took, but his stance spoke levels on his well-being. He had a slight hunch, and even though he tried to hide it, his breathing was labored. He was hit, and he was trying to hide it, which he did well, considering what happened to the rest of their group. Castra left for an exit opposite of where they were situated, and descended by way of ladder until it reached the ground. The ladder exit opened into an alleyway, and from there, Castra would regroup with the rest of the Mariv troop. He made sure to activate his own cloaking when before exiting the building and down the ladder wells. When he reached the end of the alleyway, it opened up to another major roadway and further into the city. He had previously noted predetermined patrol paths of soldiers that he could blend with, but before exiting onto the road, he turned back to the building he had just left, hoping that Tarek would follow, but he never did. Instead, several shots took his place. They were heavier, with a dull pop that followed. Its sound was unlike their service pistol he was fairly acquainted with. There wasn't even an exchange of fire. It was purely one-sided. Tarek had perished. He sighed heavily with sorrow evident in his breath. "Fathers, guide him." As he met the soldiers of the compound, they saw to it that he be granted entry. The area was a far cry from its previous state, before the invasion, and lost much of its appeal. It was once a symbol of might for the warriors of Celia, being an untouched bastion of authority while they order a conquest to worlds both known and unknown. But now it was reinforced, fearing their enemy and the attacks soon to come. A sad truth for Castra. The rest of the soldiers were donned in standard armor, sporting a black undersuit with matted gray service armor. Some wore decorated sashes, which, in the field, told him that they were part of the General Ground Troop, the largest conglomerate of soldiers available for use by the War Council. There was no uniformity between them in that sense, so it was widely accepted for them. However, it was different for a troop such as his own, the Malariv troop. They donned the same undersuit and armor as their brothers and sisters, but his command donned a red sash with glacial marking on the front of his helmet, accented with teal on the top frame. There were many soldiers who tried to emulate it, but never got it quite right. Walking through the compound courtyard, he picked up on several ongoing conversations concerning troops on separate fronts. "Looks like the reports finally came in from the east," spoke a soldier who leaned against a wall while the person they spoke to sat against it, cleaning his weapon. "Oh yeah? How's it looking?" they replied, not taking their eyes off from their weapon. "Not good. They've had to fall back again, but they ran into friendly armor, so they're holding them at bay. Once the group supporting the attack on the Terrans at the Sendri Park, then I'd say we might even retake the east," replied the leaning soldier. "Akhtari, Terrans be damned. What of the west? I was sure there was gunfire not too far from here," replied the sitting soldier, their attention now on the one beside him. "I think that was the ambush team. Probably made short work of the enemy, seeing how short it lasted, but we should probably send a team to investigate." Castra now interjected to the proposition of the soldier. "Don't waste your time. The ambush team is dead." The two shot up to attention at his presence, attempting to render a salute, but he put them at ease faster than they could do so. The first to reply was an older male, the one previously leaning against the sandbagged compound walls. "How do you mean?" he asked. "The name's Adalak, by the way," he added, reaching his hand out to meet their superior. "War Chief Castra. Well met, trooper," he replied. "But I mean that the ambush team was obliterated. Nothing really left, so get to your posts. We may have incoming and keep your eyes open," he ordered. They left promptly, alerting the rest of the idle hands around the compound to an alert status. He had already let the gate guard know before entering, but it seemed like they weren't quick enough to disseminate the warning. He didn't see them in action, but with how quickly it ended, he feared their skill in combat. As a result, he decided against trying to assist others in combat, as he previously promised to do with Tarek. Right now, he just wanted to leave, but couldn't do so without the authorization from his commander. He then entered the main doors to the council, meeting first with an abandoned receptionist's desk and the lack of occupants, assuming all to be out in the yards of the compound manning its defense. Instead of entering from the left, where the council hid, he went right into a series of rooms until he entered a small closet which housed janitorial equipment. With the door closed behind him, he retrieved a small device which was circular in design with a smaller circular depress with glass installed. He pressed a button on its side, and the smaller depression lit up with an amber-colored form. It was an older Celian that donned a set of expensive earrings and a headdress. Their hair was parted to the sides, leading most of it to the rear, while leaving his face free of his bangs. It was his commander. "War Chief Commander Mariv, what are your orders?" asked Castra, as the glow of the hologram lightly illuminated the small room. "That depends, Castra," spoke the commander. "How are things on the ground?" Castra paused for a moment before returning a reply. "Bad. From what I can gather, the enemy employs some intricate and deadly ordnance. Tarek had also fallen to their assault and failed in the kill order," reported Castra. "Failed? Explain," ordered Mariv. "As you requested, we set up an ambush on their predicted route. Tarek was the first to identify the target and made the shot, but—" Castra trailed off, urging Mariv to inquire, and forced him to continue. "The target lives, and the rest of our team was turned into liquid. I was the only survivor," he reported. His commander shared a solemn expression, exuding sympathy and sorrow alike at the loss of his subordinate. "Then," Mariv paused, "I find it best you soon retreat. I'll prep for you a shuttle, but it will be away from the combat zone. The enemy is keen on maintaining command of the skies." "What of the War Council? Should they not be protected?" inquired Castra, but Mariv showed visible disdain for the name. "They are fools who have set our homes on fire by inciting this war in the first place. I have tried to assist in the liberation and safety of our world, but the enemy is powerful, albeit few in numbers, he replied. Castra was conflicted in his commander's reasoning, and it showed on his face, prompting Mariv to add to his earlier statement. I love our home, and I would fight for it, but the enemy is too powerful for us. They would leave us as food for the worms of the earth. I will not sacrifice my soldiers in a losing battle. Return, and do so in silence. There should be a maintenance tunnel that leads towards the inner sanctum of the council chambers. Use that to gain as much information from the traitors and leave. It will take you far towards the north, to the city's northern grid farm. That is where I will send for you. Understood, Chief Commander, replied Castra. Then I best be on my way. He began to speak before the walls and ground around him shook violently, with loose items placed upon shelves falling onto him. What the? He said aloud, prompting concern from his superior. What is the matter, Castra? Are you under attack? I do not know, he replied. Something must have collided with the shield. The enemy may be upon us. If that is true, voiced Mariv, all the more reason to leave. Let the warriors of the standard troop face their master's enemy. Go, be gone. We've already lost Tarek. I can't afford to lose you too. The concern shown to him by Mariv was seemingly out of character, which threw him off guard, but he welcomed it. He had no real feelings for his fellow warriors, not of his own troop, as they came and went, but those in a committed command he could bond with. Like with Tarek, he was younger than himself, but he was selected by Mariv himself as a crack shot, albeit impatient in the field. But he stuck around when things got bad, and together they bonded. He was a warrior to be proud of, which led Castra to think little of a troop-less soldier's life. They had plenty of opportunities to join an organized group like Malariv's troop or even the Gander's Fist, but instead they went standard. I understand, Commander. I will make haste, replied Castra. He turned his holographic communicator off, revealing only the simplest of floor lighting to keep himself not entirely in the dark. When he opened the door, he found the hall to be filled with a cloud of dust, most likely from the impact from earlier. He tried to listen for the soldiers and heard them shouting orders at one another, but the howl of death itself filled the air, followed by a series of explosions, cutting off their words before they could finish their sentence. A multitude of smaller thumps sounded around him in a faster repetition, and he did well to dive onto the ground to save him from a potential stray round. After witnessing what happened to his earlier team, he was again fearful of the new and sudden tactic employed by the enemy. He wasn't far from the entrance, and he activated his suit's cloaking before attempting to peek from its frame. He stayed low and hovered before the door until the impacts and explosions stopped. When it sounded like it was clear, he leaned over and looked into the courtyard. What was once plentiful with able-bodied soldiers were now reduced to craters and smoke. Green liquid was seen plastered upon the walls across from him, with what looked to be an arm still gripping half a rifle, like it was embedded into the sandbags itself. It made him nauseous. The poor fools, he said aloud, but there was no one to hear him. He spied the culprit circling above in the air in a new location, with bright orange tracers leading from it and into more Celian infantry. As it continued to rain down death upon his own, he turned away, back to the room he had left prior. He remained low, this time only to a crouch, as he made his way back into the darkened room. He looked around for an access button described to him previously by Mariv before landing into the city. The room was dark, with gray panels making up the color of the room, enclosing him. Of course, somewhere hidden behind the stands and shelves that were placed to his left and right, but the one he was interested in was directly in front of him, parallel to the door. It was an off-white compared to the duller light blue that emanated near it. If one looked at it, they would have found it to be simply a faulty bulb or ignore it completely. Instead of reaching down, he quickly tapped it with his foot, and with a low and taxed hum, a panel in front of him opened, revealing a ladder within a shaft that led downwards, with similarly colored light blue trail lights leading to the bottom. He mounted the ladder, and by pressing a button in between the first two steps, the hidden doors closed, encasing him into a shroud of a dimly lit shaft. It was large enough for his frame and allowed for some wiggle room for his armor and weapon. After reaching the bottom, he found the shaft had a gentle slope downward and enough room for him to crouch through it. Luckily, the flooring for the tunnel was sturdy enough to not warp to his every step, allowing him to relax his stride just slightly. However, as he traveled through it, he began to smell a foul odor that couldn't be completely filtered by his helmet. He gagged when he unconsciously took a large breath and began searching for the cause. There were numerous side panels beside him that looked alien, until he came across a set of thin, plain, horizontal panels that could be maneuvered either electronically to manually for airflow. He opened several until he came across the origin of the odor and peered through them. It wasn't dark, but it was lit just slightly brighter than his tunnel, adding to his eyes straining to focus on anything further than 20 or so feet from where he crouched. Within it, he saw several large bodies huddled together over something he couldn't make out. He knew their frame from miles away, as they were known as the mightiest and most ruthless killers to the Union, the Runyan Attack Force. He didn't fear them as most did, but he was simply disgusted by them, wishing upon them nothing but death. For now, however, he disregarded his feelings in the search of information. As he oriented himself to optimize his helmet's environmental headset, their voices came clear as they did little to speak hushed tones. In fact, they were loud and obnoxious, prompting him to relax from the vent opening and just listen. "Ah, so graceful, Sir Pola, it is," said one as he took a bite out of the barely recognizable corpse, sporting a simple red tunic that covered only half of its chest and wrapped around the torso. "Indeed, Bokta. This one was easy to lay, and delicious too," replied another, this time sporting no clothing, only straps of leather tied and decorated with scraps of metal. "Many of our brothers would want to know the feel of a Selan. Not often we are given grace such as this," said Bokta. "Perhaps Sir Pola will reward us with more Selan females. I wish to experience that joy again." "He must. We protect him and his flock by order of Neela. Surely they will reward us," said another as they ran a femur through its teeth, stripping it of excess meat. Their acts disgusted him, and as his eyes adjusted to the room, he saw the carnage that filled the room. The floor was stained dark green, and bones of familiar structure began to pile up into a corner. He was angry at their very presence, and the naming of Neela added fuel to his hate. Still, he continued to listen in. "Unpleasant they wear unsavory scrap upon their heads," added Bokta, tossing aside a headdress that shone silver with a star-shaped central ornament with an emerald gem. Castra had seen something similar in a store that sold plenty, with this one leaning on the more expensive end. Their conversation began to swirl into unimportant items such as their first kills or their favorite rock. Disappointed and saddened, Castra departed further into the tunnel searching for the War Council. "Damned things. I hope the wrath of the Fathers befall you surely," he muttered. "If the Terrans enter here, then perhaps those forsaken souls may find rest at your deaths." Through opening countless vents, searching for the council, he finally came upon a brightly lit room where the five sat. This time their backs were turned to him as they sat around a table in heated discussion. "What are we to do, Reka? Our forces are being decimated. These are your soldiers who've you taught to be effective in combat. Look at them now. The enemy is on our doorstep, and I'm pretty sure they just bombed the council chambers," shouted Polis, a man donning pristine purple robes with added gold lining, with near the quantity of fabric usually reserved for the head war chief, Kalim. I don't know," muttered Reka. "The enemy has shown utmost skill that our troops could only hope to imitate. They have no drive, and most who join don't last long for it to matter," he replied, saddened by his military incompetence. "Seriously, why do we not pull from the choke worlds? Surely if we take a few from each, we can supplement our forces before the enemy gets reinforcements," added Polis. With each word, Castra saw how it ate at Reka, who was known to be adequate as a military advisor. As he knew it, Reka was only decent in space combat, and had little experience in ground combat. Even changes in the infantry training regimen did little to actually improve or innovate the standard troops. Even I can make you aware how terrible an idea that is. Those worlds are the only thing from letting the Union run amok in our space. If we pull even the smaller ships, it would still diminish their combat force, he said, before he was cut off by Polis. We are losing our cradle world, Reka, he shouted in anger. We have to do something or it will mean our heads. Fathers know how this will end, for all of us. Reka couldn't deny his logic, seeing how the enemy effectively occupied their skies and decimate their ground troops with fewer soldiers than their own. It was a subject even Castra would like to study should he get the chance, but he listened further to their discourse. 2 months, began Reka. 2 months. It would have taken for the Choke World ships to make it to Celia, and Torlak was routed for the last time barely a month ago. In less than 2 days, our fleet in orbit were subdued, and our cannons destroyed in the vicinity where it mattered. Whoever commands the Terran infantry is a force to be reckoned with, and we may have no choice but to surrender, he finished, before a hand met the side of his cheek, and the sound of the slap reverberated through the room, leaving him in shock. Head Chief Callum was the one to deliver the blow. Callum sat back down in his seat, leaving the other 4 in silence. It was the first that he had taken action like that before, that it left them stunned. We will not surrender our home to the Terrans. True, we have been foolish in our quest to be rid of the Union, only for us to be in conflict with another, started Callum. But I felt it necessary to expand further from our ancient enemy. I was confident we had the ships and troops to engage in such a campaign, but we were wrong. That, since we had beaten back the Union, that we could easily rid ourselves of an unknown race before they got too big to handle. But look how wrong we were. No, we shall fight to the last on Celia. Callum relaxed in his seat, leaving behind a bout of silence after his speech. After a moment, Brekka raised his hand to speak, which was granted by the head chief. Speak, Brekka. What do you have for us? Said Callum. When Mistress Neela left, she offered her support should we need it. Is now not the most opportune time? If by her grace she helps us, then we can utilize the Choke World fleets to take back the lost systems from the Terrans. That was news to Castra. He was unaware that Neela had presented herself to the council, offering future aid. From that alone, it would act as a pretense for Union occupation again. All they knew was to conquer, and if they were given free access into the heart of their empire, then it would be theirs. It was only by earlier fleets 20 years ago that they fought them back before they took any majorly populated systems. They were lucky then, but he couldn't say the same if they fought with them now. Weighing the 2 entities, Castra would rather have Celia be under Terran occupation than that of the Galactic Union. From the videos he's seen and the evidence presented, they offered occupied settlements relative peace, albeit still under martial law, but eventually he had no real say and would follow the orders of his commander despite his opinion. No, I fear that is what she wants. For far too long they have coveted our space, and not once have they set foot here with their armies, save for those beasts above, replied Callum. I will not surrender, and I will not do so quietly. The head chief brandished a weapon from beneath his clothing. It was a service pistol, still clean and unused. Chief Callum, you don't mean, started Reka, to which Callum nodded in affirmation. Let me reiterate, I will not surrender quietly. I suggest you all do the same. He pointed to a wall where a set of handguns were stored, enough for a small detail of guards. By the door, he did notice several standard troop soldiers that sat idly as they waited for their orders. He almost felt sorry for them for who they were going to go against, that he wanted to see how they operate at least once. However, he was running out of time. Soon the council would be captured, or killed, and the planet would be taken over. He had to leave before that happens. He continued on through the tunnel, when he heard faint gunfire that began to echo through the tunnel, the sound reverberating throughout his body with each shot. He assumed it to be the enemy encountering the Runians. The fire sustained for nearly 2 minutes, before slowly subsiding, then nothing. When he thought it was over, he heard a distinct shot from a weapon he had yet to experience. It was loud and pierced the air, as there was a pause in between each shot. It was thicker in sound that enveloped him, unlike the soft, dull pops that took Tarek's life. Whatever it was, it made a killing blow to its victim. Seeing how much the Runians lacked firearms, it couldn't have been them. He bid them a cold farewell, in the hopes that they burned in their afterlife. Castra followed the tunnel even further, and the sounds of the inner sanctum were now absent. Only the dry hum of air and electronics that lined the walls provided any ambience that he was anywhere at all. The small lights from electronics blinked at intervals, which helped light his way as he continued forth, his eyes now fully adjusted to the lack of light. However, he noticed a speck of bright light that had placed itself at the end of the tunnel after he rounded a corner, filling his sunken heart with a modicum of joy, thankful to soon be free of the seemingly miles of duct he had traversed. "Thank the fathers, the sun," he said aloud, and quickened his pace. As he neared the exit, he slowed his jog to a walk and observed the entrance with his rifle until his eyes began to adjust to the sudden brightness. The area before him led into a concrete walkway, with a large circular platform in the center that had more pathways perpendicular to it. And in the empty space adjacent to the walkways were transformers of the local electronic grid. In the center of the platform was a small shuttle, one designed solely for transport, and for little else. It was small and sleek, with the sides of the main compartment opening to allow entry. It was quick and ultimately quiet. Due to its low electromagnetic output, it was quite often used for tactical insertions in areas too heavy with anti-air capabilities. However, for his situation, it was the perfect exit. As he approached the shuttle, the left-hand door opened, revealing a four-man squad of similarly dressed Sellians, all of whom he was close with. "Castra, you fool! Where have you been? And where is Tarek?" spoke the center man. He was slightly taller than himself, but boasted a decent, muscular build compared to the rest of the squad. Like him, he too was a war chief, as indicated by a single chevron on his upper arm. "Moriv, my apologies, but I was part of a kill order for a certain Terran when we were counterattacked. The group of standards with me were turned to liquid and Tarek survived, but decided to try to face the Terran in single combat. It was his wish," explained Castra. "Fathers guide him." Moriv hung his head low and offered a solemn salute in the fallen's name. "I have heard of the order for the Terran, but to think he survived a shot from Tarek. What do you know of him?" "Very little," Castra responded. "Only that Tarek said he still lives, and if the stories are anything to go by, the very Terran he failed to kill was the one who did him in. No one takes a shot like that and lets the shooter live. I know I wouldn't." Castra then boarded the shuttle with the others and lifted off when all five were aboard. As they flew, he would peer out the side of the door where there was a pane of reinforced glass and saw the battle unfold from a distance. Large ships, shaped like predatory birds, danced in the skies as they chased their Sellian counterparts. The Terran design captured his eye, as they were sleek and aggressively angular. Some had long swept wings, others were broad, but they were nimble. Many of the Sellian fighters ditched the winged model some several hundred years ago in favor of a 360 degree of maneuverability. They kept it ever since. Most of their designs were broad in their cross-section, but they opted for curves tailored to the aircraft. He had even spotted several designs contrary to the previous, with variable thrusters on the edge of the wings, and a side-loading door that dispensed troops. They weren't uniform in production by any means, so he would find more unique designs during the battle until finally they were in orbit, intrigued by their expanded utility. They traveled until they were on the other side of the planet, and the battle overhead could no longer be witnessed. In fact, the scene was only a quiet sphere of a planet they called home, with no hint of war ever occurring. In the distance, and as they drew close, the likeness of a familiar ship enlarged in their view, with the hangar open ready for them to board. The ship in question was smaller compared to other ships of its class, but made up for it with new technology. It was sleek, opting for smooth angles instead of their rotund cousins utilized by the current fleets. with its construction redesigned to provide protection and shielding to the lower compartments previously exposed in current and earlier models. To say it is a redesign is an understatement, as it reflected an entirely new style. Surprisingly, it more resembled a Terran Corvette, just massively upscaled. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" muttered Morive. Castra and the others within the cabin agreed to its beauty, noting the blackened underframe contrasting with its matted silver hull plating. On the larger portion of its bow, its name was painted this time in ancient Celian. When translated, it read, "Malarive's Foresight." "I never get tired of seeing it," replied Castra. With a subtle rock of the shuttle, they saw themselves enter the barrier to the hangar, and what was once nothing but void was now lively with people and working hands as they moved to and fro about the deck. "Busy, are we?" said Castra, regarding the amount of movement below. "I would like to think so," replied Morive. "We're going to be jumping out of system, and you were the last to be picked up. Consider yourself lucky." The ship thudded softly against the deck, and with a hiss, the side doors opened vertically, with the bottom half equipped with a step. He holstered his rifle across his back and stepped off, with the sounds of orders and conversation filling his ears with normalcy. But before he could wallow in it, he was approached by the man who commanded him, Morive. "Good to see you are well, brother," said Morive. It was well known with the crew that Morive and Morive were brothers, as it was the former who declared it, although some were skeptical because of their age difference, with Morive being much younger than his supposed brother. "I do remember telling you to address me as Chief or Commander," Morive replied as he pointed to the 3 chevrons upon his arms. "So, how is it on the ground? Our comms went dark for a moment, so we haven't received an update." Castra was the first to reply. "Worse, Chief Commander. Last I spoke, the men of the compound were alive and well." "Were?" interjected Morive. Confusion littered about his face. "Yes. When the chambers were struck, a rain of fire continued from the air by way of a ship, much smaller than one of a corvette size, but boasted the weapons equivalent. All it did was circle above us, but when I walked out into the yard, well, they were unrecognizable." Castra detailed the after effects of the bombardment, and those around him grew grim at the display of firepower at the Terran's disposal. It was precise enough that use of it within a city is viable for ground support, and it can keep surrounding infrastructure intact, focusing solely on infantry and armored vehicles, I presume. Some of the ordnance used seemed like it would do best against vehicles, he explained. It was a sharp analysis from his brief interaction with it, but it was something he was always good at discerning. "Impressive! All that from seeing what it did after? I knew I was right to have you in my troop. Now come, I'll need a full detailed account on your exit," said Morive, beckoning him to follow. After entering a room designated for conferences, Morive, and Castra were the only ones present, as they awaited for others in charge of crucial divisions. It was after the last to seat that they were able to begin their debrief, beginning with Morive. "As you all know, Celia has fallen," he began, deterring the hopefuls that it had a chance at resisting post-invasion. "But all is not lost. We still have a chance at normalcy, as currently, we are traveling to a system of outer colonies. We will be far from Union space, and currently controlled Terran space. It allows us some time to rebuild a fleet for our protection, but we shall not make the same mistake as the Council did." His words left many confused, their eyes urging him to explain before a sudden bout of mutiny suddenly occurs. He thus played a video that had already been widely circulated through the Celian net, as one of Councilman Polis's many speeches denouncing the new race and their act of territorial expansion. Much of what Polis has said was nothing but a front to delude our fellow Celians into fighting a war doomed from the start. Like us, the Terrans expanded towards a territory coveted by our empire, without knowing who we are. They have made that clear. We are their first encounter to the stars, and we have failed them. Even at the order of our chief general, we even tried to carry out a kill order against a prominent field warrior at his behest. No, the time now is to be frugal with our resources and to do so wisely, he said, pausing for inquiry from the group. One male chief presented his hand and spoke. "Then what do you have us do?" We are forsaking our cradle to a race of warriors mightier than the Vixians, perhaps more so than the Runians." The individual in question garnered like-minded acknowledgement from his peers as they turned to Marie for an explanation. "It pains me to say it, but the Celia Empire is no more. The Choke Worlds will undoubtedly unite under the doctrine set 20 years ago and defend those worlds from all trespassers." "That means we are alone," replied Marie, "and the outer colonies will be left unprotected. They shall be our new home, and it will be under oath to Malariv, our empire's founder." His explanation seemed to soothe dissent, as another asked a more favorable question, this time from a female chief captain that oversaw the ship's fighter accompaniment. "Then, how do you propose we approach this new race, these Terrans?" asked the chief captain. "With cautionary arms," he stated. "I have reason to believe the Union may be involved with our downfall." His statement rose in them fear and anxiety. "The Council?" spoke one Celian, in charge of ship's weapons. "For what reason?" Mariv did what he could to calm them, ultimately turning his attention to Castra, who stood silently at the far end of the room. "Lucky for us, I had someone find that out. Castra, if you will," he replied, as the chief in question began playing a video of his time in the tunnels. Mariv then began narrating context to the video before him taking it. "Earlier, here in the video, I had tasked Castra and the late Tarek with a kill order of a Terran soldier marked with gold and a face etched like a demon, said to have been the one to fell the mighty Brallo." Murmurs began to rise from the group, but Mariv continued, "We failed in that effort and saw firsthand what they can do in combat. They are truly a force to be reckoned with, but they can also be a valuable ally. But I digress." He then skipped to the point of an earlier topic, skipping past the bombarded courtyard of the council chambers and into the tunnels below the city, where he stopped with their scaled adversaries in view. Gasps were made, and anger grew present upon their countenance. "What are Runians doing in the inner sanctum?" shouted an earlier chief, followed by another. "Are they eating a citizen?" The audio had been playing, overlaid with simple subtitles to follow in the absence of sound. However, instead of fear, they were furious. A ruthless enemy laid within their soil, an act unheard of since their secession from the Union. They were prideful in that fact, that not a single Union warrior had set foot on their cradle until now. "That's right," added Mariv. "The Council betrayed our trust and let the enemies within our gates, where they have allowed the defilement of our citizens as their payment. But that is not all." He fast-forwarded the video to just before Castra opened the vent to where the councilman hid. Several shots were replayed, not sharing the same effect as in person, but delivered the same conclusion Castra made upon hearing it. "It appears that the Terrans had entered the sanctum and put an end to those lizards. A shame you didn't see it happen," said Mariv, clearly disappointed. He then focused it on the councilman, stating that they could call upon the assistance of Neela if they wanted. Another act of treason so high that the room had essentially turned into a sauna from their heated fury. It was a wonder they didn't make a call to return to the city and bombard the chambers until a mile-deep crater replaced it. "That's right. Another tally for the traitors, I suppose," he added, this time his expression reflecting solemnity and wisdom. "We cannot give up on our people who still live, and I do not want to forsake those under control of the Terrans. But we need to be realistic. You've all seen what they can do with a fleet much smaller than our own. They were outnumbered and outgunned, yet they persevered. We must do the same. We will claim a section of colony space as our own and secede formally from the Celian Empire. It is our only choice that can provide us with an out." He paused, urging those in the room to dissent or provide an alternative, but none came. Instead, they agreed. Castra was still unsure of what would befall them, but he prayed that it would end opposite of what became of their cradle world. He wished that in the near future they would be able to return to it. "Until next time, I suppose," he muttered as he reconvened with the other troopers. It was a sour experience overall, and he wished it wasn't so. He had lost his friend to an enemy they are now removing themselves from to secure their future. But orders were orders. He held no ill will towards the Terrans, and he certainly doesn't condone the loss of their home, but he understood should the roles have been reversed. In the end, he cursed the general that led him and his people to war. As short his visit was in the capital, it came at a price. He only hoped the Terrans would be fair to his people, unlike what they have done to theirs. The ship had now entered an intersystem gate. Unknown to him at that moment, the war was won.